The rain kept getting harder. Thick drops hammered the cabin roof until it sounded like gravel pouring onto sheet metal. Rick's patrol boat idled 10 feet off my port side, blocking the narrow approach channel like he owned the lake itself. The floating barrier chain groaned against the current. I could already see driftwood piling near the spillway markers upstream. That was bad. Cedar Ridge only pushed debris like that when the lower channels started backing up. My radio cracked again. "Cole Marine, respond immediately." Static swallowed half the sentence. Then came the sound I had not heard in almost 7 years. The secondary flood alarm. Low. Mechanical. Steady. I reached for the throttle, but Rick raised one hand at his guards. 2 more spotlights snapped on and flooded my windshield in white glare. "You move another foot," he yelled. "You are getting cited for trespassing and unauthorized marina access." Trespassing. On the same water my father spent 30 years maintaining. I tasted cold coffee and lake water in the back of my throat. The whole thing would have been funny if that siren was not still echoing across the dam. Vanessa Whitmore stood dry beneath her umbrella on Dock 7. Watching like this was theater. Gold bracelets flashed under the dock lights every time she moved her hand. She had turned Cedar Ridge into a floating country club over the last year. New yacht slips, private shoreline parties, security patrols, access gates. She even replaced the old county warning signs with polished HOA plaques that read Private Water District. The county made her take those down twice. She put them back up both times. A branch slammed into the side of my hull, hard enough to shake the cabin. I looked toward the north wall again. Water was climbing faster now. The old concrete flood markers were almost gone beneath the chop. Rick finally noticed where I kept looking. "You are done here tonight," he shouted. "Miss Whitmore already revoked your marina contract." Another mistake. Vanessa did not control my marina contract. She only controlled the docks connected to her HOA shoreline. The emergency spillway route existed under a separate county easement. Older than half the homes around this lake. Rick just did not know it yet. Neither did most of the homeowners sipping wine behind those giant lakefront windows. A flash of lightning ripped across the clouds. For half a second, the entire spillway tower lit up silver against the rain. Then every light on the north dock flickered once. Just once. My stomach tightened. That backup transformer should not have been struggling already. "Ethan." The voice came through my handheld radio this time. Deputy Carla Ruiz. Breathless. "We just lost overflow readings at Station 2. I grabbed the mic instantly. "Did the county clear Gate 3? A long pause answered me first. I heard papers moving. Distant voices. Then Carla came back quieter than before. "They cannot access the gate remotely." I looked straight at the floating barrier stretched across my channel. Then at Rick standing there with his chest puffed out in a rain jacket 2 sizes too clean for real work. He still thought this was about HOA authority. Another wave slapped hard against the dock pilings behind Vanessa. One of the decorative lanterns tipped sideways and shattered into the water. Nobody on shore smiled after that. Then the emergency lights on the spillway tower turned red. The red lights on the spillway tower cut through the rain like flares. Every few seconds they reflected off the lake in broken streaks. Rick finally lowered his loudspeaker. Not because he understood the danger, because he was starting to hear it. The water sounded different now. Heavier. Faster. Cedar Ridge always made noise during storms, but this was deeper. A hard rolling pressure against concrete and steel. The kind you felt through your boots before you heard it with your ears. Vanessa stepped closer to the dock railing and shouted across the water. "You are not authorized to operate anything on this lake anymore, Ethan." Her voice carried sharp over the wind. Too polished. Too calm. She still thought this was a power play. I killed my engine and let the boat drift another few feet toward the barrier. Rainwater streamed off the brim of my cap. "Then call the county yourself," I shouted back. "Ask them who controls Gate 3. She folded her arms instantly. That answer told me everything. She had never called. Never checked. She had spent months throwing money at lawyers, private security, and fake shoreline authority without understanding what actually sat underneath this lake. A dock cable snapped somewhere near the north slips. The crack echoed across the shoreline like a rifle shot. Heads turned immediately. One of the expensive pontoon boats slammed sideways against a piling. Its alarm started screaming into the storm. Nobody moved toward it. They were all staring at the spillway lights now. My radio hissed again. Carla sounded tighter this time. County engineers are 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. The overflow warning system only gave 30 before mandatory release procedures kicked in. Less if debris blocked the intake channels. I looked upstream again and saw an entire wall of branches drifting toward the western culvert. Too much debris. Too fast. The storm runoff from the hills had finally hit the basin. Rick heard enough to realize this was getting beyond him. His shoulders shifted. Small change, but I noticed it. Then Vanessa stepped beside him and grabbed the loudspeaker herself. Nobody opens anything until county officials arrive. There it was. The real problem. Control. Vanessa did not care about the water. She cared about winning in front of her homeowners. Admitting she was wrong would destroy the image she built around this lake. The perfect HOA president. The woman who turned Cedar Ridge into a luxury destination. She could not back down now. Not with everyone watching from their lake houses and dock patios. Lightning flashed again. This time the north shoreline went dark for almost 3 full seconds before the emergency dock lights kicked in red. A few people started yelling from the marina. One woman grabbed her phone and pointed toward the waterline creeping over the lower ramps. The smell changed suddenly. Wet electrical insulation. Hot transformer casing. I knew that smell. Somewhere near the north dock, water had already reached one of the secondary utility boxes. I reached under my seat and pulled out the yellow metal case holding the manual release. Key assembly. Rick noticed it instantly. "What is that?" he asked. I held it up just enough for the dock lights to catch the federal seal stamped across the side. Even through the rain, I saw Vanessa's face tighten for the first time all night. Then the emergency siren changed pitch. The siren dropped into a lower tone that rolled across the lake like thunder trapped in metal. Every engineer around Cedar Ridge knew what that sound meant. Mandatory flood response. No more waiting. No more debate. The spillway had to open. One of Rick's guards finally looked nervous. He stepped closer to the patrol console and checked something on his screen. Rainwater poured off his hood while the red emergency lights flashed across his face. "Rick," he said quietly. "The county alert just updated." Vanessa snapped toward him immediately. "Do not unlock anything." Her voice cracked for the first time all night. Small crack, but it was there. Another surge rocked my boat hard enough to rattle the tool case beside my feet. The floating barrier chain jerked tight again. One of the anchor buoys dipped halfway underwater before popping back up sideways. Too much pressure. The western runoff channels were pushing directly into the basin now. I could smell churned lake mud rising through the rain. The old-timers around here used to say Cedar Ridge warned you before it flooded. First came the smell. Then the silence from the birds. Then the water climbed where it did not belong. Right on cue, the shoreline went dead quiet except for alarms and wind. Even the gulls were gone. Vanessa climbed onto the lower dock ramp in expensive white rain boots that were already splashed brown with runoff water. "You were trying to scare people," she yelled at me. "This is still private HOA property." I stared at her for a second through the rain. Behind her, lake water slid over the edge of Dock 4 and spread across the wooden planks in thin dark sheets. She either did not notice or refused to. "That water crossed your property line 10 minutes ago," I said. Her jaw tightened instantly. Another homeowner stepped beside her under an umbrella. Older guy, gray beard, lakefront owner from the East Shore. Recognized him from county maintenance meetings years ago. He pointed straight at my boat. "Why does he have a federal access case?" he asked. Vanessa ignored him completely. That told me she never explained any of this to her residents. She sold them the image. Private lake. Exclusive access. Controlled shoreline. She just forgot one thing. Water does not care about HOA marketing. Carla's voice burst through my radio again. Louder now. Ethan, listen carefully. County engineers confirmed remote release failure. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Rain hammered the cabin roof. What failed? Control relays are offline. Manual gate release is now the only option. Rick heard every word. So did the homeowners standing behind Vanessa. The whole dock went still. I watched the realization spread slowly across their faces. The patrol boats, the floating barriers, the private access signs. None of it mattered anymore. The lake only cared whether someone could reach that gate in time. Rick looked back toward the spillway tower glowing red through the storm. Then toward the barrier chain his own crew locked across the channel. Another warning horn blasted from upstream. Longer this time. Lower. The sound vibrated through the steering wheel in my hands. Then one of the dock lights exploded in a shower of sparks near the flooded shoreline steps. People started backing away from the water immediately. Vanessa did not move. She just stared at the yellow case beside my seat like she finally understood she had blocked the wrong boat. Then Rick reached for the barrier controls. Rick's hand froze halfway over the barrier control panel. Rain drummed against the aluminum housing while the red emergency lights flashed across his face. For the first time all night, he looked less like security and more like a guy realizing he might lose his job before sunrise. Vanessa noticed it too. "Do not touch that chain," she snapped. The wind caught her umbrella and flipped it backward hard enough to rip one of the metal arms loose. She cursed under her breath and threw the thing aside. Water surged over the lower dock ramp behind her. Cold brown runoff swirled around her boots. Still she refused to move. I kept one hand on the wheel and watched the spillway tower through the rain. The intake alarms were cycling faster now. That was bad. The automated system only accelerated warning intervals when pressure started building unevenly across the gates. Debris jam, partial obstruction, maybe both. My radio buzzed against the dashboard. Carla again. "Ethan, County wants visual confirmation before manual release." "You are not getting visual confirmation from 20 minutes away," I answered. "The west culvert is already choking." A loud metallic boom rolled across the lake before she could answer. Every head on the dock snapped toward the north shoreline. One of the decorative retaining walls near the luxury fire pit had partially collapsed into the water. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But enough to send muddy runoff pouring into the marina basin. Homeowners started shouting over each other immediately. Expensive patio chairs drifted loose from one deck and bumped sideways against the flooded dock slips. A woman grabbed her small dog and hurried toward the parking lot. Another guy was already trying to untie his boat with shaking hands. Vanessa turned toward the crowd fast. "Everybody stay calm," she yelled. "The HOA has emergency procedures." I almost laughed hearing that over the sirens. Vanessa's emergency procedure was usually a fine letter and a board meeting. Nature was not going to sit through either one. Rick looked between her and me again. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, "if the county really authorized him—" "They did not authorize anything," she cut in instantly. "He lost his access privileges months ago." There it was again. The lie she kept repeating until she started believing it herself. She thought Marina Access and Flood Control Authority were the same thing. They were not even close. One belonged to her shoreline contracts. The other belonged to the county water management system buried under 200 million gallons of storm runoff. Another surge slammed into the floating barrier chain. One anchor buoy disappeared completely this time before jerking back up crooked. The steel cable whined under strain. Rick finally looked. Nervous enough to step backward from the controls. Smart instinct. Wrong timing. I grabbed the yellow case beside my seat and flipped it open. Rain hit the metal latches while the interior light illuminated the release assembly inside. Heavy steel key. Manual override seals. County authorization tags. Rick stared down at it silently. One of the homeowners near the dock whispered, "Oh my God!" Vanessa heard him and spun around immediately. "Do not touch that gate," she shouted at me. "You are not operating county infrastructure without HOA clearance." Even the rain could not drown out how ridiculous that sounded anymore. Carla's voice burst through the radio again. Faster now. Ethan, listen carefully. Water just crossed the secondary flood markers near East Ridge Drive. My stomach tightened instantly. East Ridge sat almost half a mile uphill from the old shoreline. If water reached those markers already, the basin was rising faster than the county models predicted. Then every light along the marina flickered dark at once. Darkness swallowed the marina in one hard blink. The music from the clubhouse cut out instantly. So did the shoreline speakers Vanessa used for her luxury events. For half a second, the only sounds left were rain, alarms, and water hammering wood pilings. Then backup generators kicked on somewhere uphill with a low mechanical growl. Red emergency lights flickered back across the docks, painting the flooded marina like a crime scene. People started moving fast after that. Expensive shoes splashed through rising water. Boat alarms screamed from half-submerged slips. Somebody dropped a cooler into the lake and never went back for it. Rick grabbed the barrier control again, but this time Vanessa physically stepped between him and the panel. "Nobody touches that chain until county officials arrive," she snapped. "Do you understand me?" Her mascara had started running from the rain. Her perfect lake president image was melting right along with the shoreline. Rick hesitated. Wrong move. Another surge rolled through the channel and slammed the floating barrier sideways. One of the steel anchor mounts tore loose with a sharp metallic shriek. The whole chain dipped dangerously close to the waterline. My radio burst alive with overlapping voices. County dispatch, marina security, utility crews, everybody talking at once now. Then Carla cut through all of it. "Ethan, East Ridge pumps just failed." I looked uphill toward the dark line of lake houses above the marina. East Ridge sat higher than almost every dock on Cedar Ridge. If their drainage pumps failed already, runoff was backing into the residential storm channels. Fast. "How many homes?" I asked. Static crackled. "Potentially all lower shoreline properties." One homeowner heard that from the dock and went pale immediately. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and started dialing someone. Vanessa noticed the panic spreading and raised her voice again. "Everyone remain calm. This situation is under control." Right as she said it, another section of dock broke loose from the outer marina line. Wood cracked. Metal groaned. A 20-foot section drifted sideways into a pontoon slip and pinned 2 empty kayaks against the railings. Nobody even reacted anymore. The storm had moved past denial. People were finally starting to understand the lake was stronger than HOA rules. I opened the yellow case fully and lifted the manual release assembly into view. Rainwater streamed down the steel handle. The federal seal caught the flashing red lights. One of Rick's guards stepped back immediately after seeing it. "Sir," he said quietly to Rick, "that is county infrastructure equipment." Vanessa whipped toward him so fast her soaked jacket sprayed water across the dock. "Do not say another word." She pointed directly at me. "He lost all operational privileges after violating marina compliance agreements." I stared at her through the rain. "You keep confusing your docks with the dam." That landed harder than I expected. Even the homeowners behind her stopped moving for a second, because deep down they already knew she had sold them something fake. Not the homes. Not the docks. Control. She acted like the lake belonged to her because she installed gates, hired guards, and hosted wine mixers beside the shoreline. But water infrastructure does not care about social status. It only cares who can operate it when things fail. Lightning flashed overhead again. This time I saw water spilling across the parking lot behind Dock 4. Tires were already half underwater near the lower boat ramp. Then Carla came back over the radio with a voice tight enough to freeze my blood. "Ethan, the county just declared mandatory emergency release authorization." Rick looked straight at Vanessa after hearing that, and she still shook her head. Rain slammed sideways across the lake so hard it blurred the shoreline lights into red smears. Rick stood frozen beside the barrier controls while water surged around the dock supports below him. Vanessa kept shaking her head like refusing reality could somehow lower the lake. "Nobody authorizes anything without HOA approval," she shouted again. Her voice sounded smaller now. The storm kept swallowing it. Then the western warning horn blasted 3 times in rapid succession. Every engineer in the county knew that sequence. Structural pressure escalation. The intake channels were clogging faster than expected. I grabbed the radio immediately. "Carla, what is the debris load reading?" Static hissed. Then her answer came sharp and fast. "Western culvert is nearly blocked. Ethan, if gate 3 stays closed much longer, the north retaining wall could fail." One of the homeowners heard the word fail and backed away from the dock instantly. Another started yelling for his wife to get the truck. Panic spread differently than storms. Storms rolled in from the sky. Panic moved face to face. I watched it travel through the marina under the flashing emergency lights. People abandoned coolers, bags, fishing gear. One woman slipped in ankle-deep water while trying to carry 2 small dogs at once. Nobody looked at Vanessa anymore. They looked at the lake. Finally, Rick wiped rain from his eyes and looked straight at me. "If I drop this barrier and something goes wrong." "Something is already wrong." I cut in. The spillway siren answered me a second later with another deep mechanical howl. The water around my hull had changed again. Faster current now. Strong enough to pull floating debris sideways toward the intake. Routes. A tree branch nearly 6 feet long slammed into the barrier chain and wrapped halfway around the steel cable before drifting loose again. The lake was feeding pressure directly into the block channel. I could almost feel the gates straining upstream. Vanessa stepped closer to Rick again. "Do not listen to him," she snapped. "The HOA attorneys are already handling this." Attorneys? In the middle of a flood emergency. Even Rick looked stunned hearing that. Then another homeowner shouted from the parking lot uphill. "The water is in the garages." Heads turned instantly. I followed their eyes toward the lower lakefront homes. Red emergency lights reflected off standing water creeping between parked SUVs and stone retaining walls. The shoreline had disappeared completely in some sections. Cedar Ridge was no longer staying inside its boundaries. My radio cracked again with overlapping county chatter. Then a new voice cut through the noise. Calm. Older. County Engineer Franklin Moore. I had not heard his voice since my father's funeral. "Ethan," he said. "Manual release authorization confirmed." Repeat. Confirmed. Silence hit the dock after that. Even the storm felt quieter for one strange second. Vanessa stared at the radio in my hand like it had betrayed her personally. Franklin kept talking. "County records show active operational authority under Cole Marine Emergency Access Agreement." There it was. Out loud. Public. Real. The thing Vanessa spent months pretending did not exist. One of the homeowners slowly turned toward her. "You told us he lost access years ago." Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, but nothing came out. Another loud crack echoed across the shoreline. This time, everybody heard concrete breaking somewhere uphill near the flooded Marina Road. Rick looked at the barrier controls one last time. Then at the water climbing over the dock planks around his boots. He swallowed hard and reached for the release lever. Vanessa grabbed his arm instantly. Vanessa clamped both hands onto Rick's arm like she could physically hold the lake back through him. "You open that barrier and you are finished," she shouted. Rain streamed down her face. The red emergency lights turned the water around her boots dark as rust. Rick looked trapped between panic and pride. Then another section of retaining wall collapsed somewhere uphill with a deep grinding roar. The sound rolled across the shoreline like thunder under concrete. Homeowners started yelling again. Car alarms echoed from the flooded parking lot. One black SUV drifted inches backward as runoff water pushed against its tires. I did not take my eyes off the channel. "Rick," I said calmly, "if that intake jams completely, this whole marina becomes the overflow path." He stared at me for one long second. Then at the floating barrier straining under debris pressure. The steel cable bowed hard enough to vibrate. A fresh wave slammed into it sideways, carrying branches, trash bins, and part of somebody's broken dock ladder. The chain groaned like it was ready to rip free on its own. Carla's voice burst through the radio again. "Ethan, we just lost visual contact with the western flood markers. That hit me harder than the alarms. Losing the markers meant water had already climbed above them. Fast. Too fast. Franklin Moore came back over the county channel immediately after her. Manual release must happen now. No hesitation in his voice anymore. No room left for debate. Rick finally pulled his arm loose from Vanessa's grip. She looked stunned, like she genuinely believed nobody would ever defy her authority in public. "You work for the HOA?" she snapped at him. Rick shook his head slowly. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his beard onto his soaked uniform collar. "Not tonight." He slammed the release lever downward. The barrier lock disengaged with a loud metallic crack. The floating chain jerked sideways instantly under the current. One anchor buoy snapped loose and disappeared downstream into the dark water. I pushed the throttle forward hard. My workboat surged through the opening while debris scraped against both sides of the hull. Red lights flashed across the windshield. Sirens echoed behind me. The channel current pulled stronger with every second. Cedar Ridge was trying to force itself through the spillway whether anyone was ready or not. I heard Vanessa screaming something from the dock, but the wind tore the words apart before they reached me. The spillway tower grew larger through the rain. Concrete walls, steel maintenance rails, water boiling white near the intake grates. Even after 30 years around this lake, that sight still hit something deep in my chest. My father used to say floodwater never looked angry, just determined. The closer I got, the worse the debris field became. Entire tree limbs spun through the current near the western intake route. One slammed against the tower supports with enough force to shake the railing. I killed the throttle beside the maintenance ladder and grabbed the yellow release case. Cold rain soaked through my jacket instantly as I climbed onto the steel platform. The whole structure vibrated beneath my boots. Gate pressure. Heavy. Constant. My flashlight beam cut across the control housing near Gate 3. Then my stomach tightened. The emergency release panel was already underwater. Cold lake water surged over the steel platform and slammed against my knees the second I reached the control housing. The emergency panel sat half underwater beneath churning runoff and floating debris. Branches scraped against the tower supports with hollow knocks that echoed through the storm. I dropped the yellow case onto the maintenance grating and ripped the latch open fully. The metal release handle inside gleamed under my flashlight beam. My father's initials were still scratched into the side from a repair job back in 1998. The whole spillway vibrated beneath my boots. Too much pressure building behind Gate 3. I clipped my safety harness onto the rail and crouched beside the submerged panel. The water smelled wrong now. Mud. Fuel. Hot electrical insulation. Somewhere behind me, another transformer blew with a muffled pop that lit the clouds blue for half a second. My radio screamed with overlapping voices. County dispatch. Utility crews. Panicked homeowners. Then Franklin cut through all of it. "Ethan, we are reading critical pressure on the North Basin." I shoved my arm into the freezing water until my fingers found the emergency release slot beneath the panel housing. Debris slammed into my side hard enough to twist me against the railing. The current was getting stronger by the minute. "I have it," I shouted back. My flashlight beam shook across the tower wall while I locked the steel release key into place. One hard turn, then another. The mechanism resisted at first. 30 years of pressure and weather grinding inside old steel gears. Then the release assembly finally groaned alive beneath the water. Deep, heavy, mechanical. I felt it through the rail before I heard it. Gate 3 was moving, slowly at first, then faster. The lake answered immediately. Water exploded through the spillway channel in a roaring white surge that shook the entire structure. Debris whipped sideways past the tower and vanished downstream into the darkness. The pressure around the platform dropped almost instantly. Not safe yet, but stabilizing. I grabbed the railing and looked back toward the marina through the rain. Red emergency lights reflected across flooded parking lots and submerged dock ramps. But the shoreline waterline had stopped climbing. Little by little, the lake was finally pushing away from the homes instead of toward them. My radio crackled again. Carla sounded breathless. "Levels are dropping at East Ridge." I closed my eyes for 1 second and let the rain hit my face. Then another voice came over the channel. Sheriff's Department this time. County units are arriving at Cedar Ridge Marina now. I already knew what they were walking into. Flooded docks, broken barriers, homeowners standing ankle-deep in water beside luxury boats and shattered retaining walls. And one HOA president trying to explain why armed security blocked emergency flood access during a county-authorized release order. By sunrise, the storm had finally moved east. Low gray clouds drifted over a lake covered in broken branches and floating dock debris. County trucks lined the marina road. Engineers inspected shoreline damage while utility crews replaced flooded transformers. The floating barrier chain sat twisted around the dock pilings like a dead snake. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the clubhouse entrance wrapped in a silver emergency blanket while county officials carried boxes of HOA records out through the front doors. Nobody listened to her anymore. Rick sat on the back bumper of a utility truck staring silently at the lake. I eased my boat away from the spillway tower as the first sunlight broke through the clouds. Cedar Ridge looked different in daylight. Quieter. Honest. The lake never cared about badges, private gates, or HOA power trips. It only cared who understood how to keep the water moving.